I've been keeping fish for 16 years, and in that time, the number of tanks I've cared for has ranged from 1 to more than 30. Now, in that time, one of the things I realized is that when you keep too many tanks, it really disconnects you from your fish and doesn't allow you to accurately monitor them, to get enjoyment out of observing them, and also just understand fully what's going on in your tank. So today I'm going to break down a more in-depth look at each of my tanks so you can understand the type of things you might be missing out on if you have too many tanks or don't spend enough time one-on-one looking at your fish and just gleaning knowledge from watching the way they behave in their tank that you might otherwise miss out on if all you do is feed them every day and not really look at them at other times. It really doesn't take that much time to observe your fish and really understand more accurately what's going on in your tank. But when you have too many, it becomes virtually impossible. So I spent 10 minutes videoing each of my tanks from the perspective you would get if you were with your fish tank sitting in front of it just watching. And I'm going to cut together some clips to show you some interesting things that I witnessed and what I can learn from what I observed. I started by taking a 10-minute clip of my angelfish tank to show what I look for if I'm just sitting watching my fish and the type of things I observe. So one of the things that I've been watching with these angelfish is looking out for spawning activity or any indication of males and females, because angelfish are really difficult to sex visually. So really the only way you know if you have boys or girls is by watching them pair up and then eventually spawn. Now, from watching them today, the main thing that I was able to gather is that the largest angelfish is definitely dominant over the other three. Now, this didn't fully explain to me whether it's a male or female, but it did explain to me just sort of the dynamic of the tank. And I was able to recognize that this one larger angelfish was basically getting first share of all the food while the other three hid and tried to sneak out and get food whenever they could. It's also interesting to note that the Corydoras on the bottom don't seem to face any aggression from the angelfish, while the other angels experience a ton of aggression. So there's most likely something related to territory and establishment of a hierarchy within the angelfish that's going on, because if it was pure aggression, the angelfish would also be attacking the Corydoras. Another thing I love to experience when watching my fish is their interaction with me. Now, in this clip, you can see that the angelfish appears to be looking out of the tank at me and asking for food. And when I observed that, I went and checked in the tank, realized that they had eaten all the food, and added a little more. I think it's always just a nice feeling to know that your pets, I mean, generally you experience this as like a dog or cat, but even fish are able to sort of recognize their owner and recognize who's providing them with food, which creates kind of an interesting connection. It also shows their intelligence, which isn't something most people expect to find in fish. After observing my angelfish, I took another 10-minute video of my Chindongo Psilocyte tank. I've already covered them in a lot of other videos, but I'll just show you a few clips of things I noticed that were interesting. So the main fish that exhibits any type of really interesting behavior in this tank is the Bristlenose pleco, because they are the only fish right now, aside from the mollies, who are really in breeding condition and are looking to actively reproduce in the tank. So one of the big things with Bristlenose pleco is that the male has to guard the eggs in a cave for so long that he can become extremely malnourished because he won't come out of the cave to eat. So a lot of this video you see the largest male Bristlenose dominating the food block, which is Rapashi, and chasing away even the female and preventing her from getting access to it. Now this is interesting because his ultimate goal is to breed with the female, but it makes sense that he would fight so hard for the food because the female gets to eat immediately after spawning. She just lays her eggs, exits, and then continues eating again, whereas he will have to stay in the cave for an extended period of time. With so many fish in this tank, individual aggression is really hard to notice and doesn't occur as frequently because it's so distributed amongst the population. But it's still really enjoyable just to watch this tank because there's so much activity going on in it. And it's also really cool to see the fish grow and just demolish a massive amount of food because of how many fish there are in the tank. I have been watching the mollies closely. I'm thinking about giving them their own tank because they seem to get kind of dominated by the Psilocybe for food. And I also think if they're ever going to have babies, they're probably just going to get snapped up right away and never get a chance to survive. So I'm thinking of putting another 10-gallon tank right here next to the 29 on the other side and getting a little molly breeding tank going. The only problem with that is I would have to sort of rearrange where everything is. Right now I keep the food over there and the air pump. So if I were to do something like that, I'm going to have to do some rearrangements and possibly a little carpentry to figure out where I'm going to mount the air pump. So if you kind of do the math, I spent 10 minutes with each of my 2 main aquariums today, observing the fish and just trying to understand better how everyone's doing in the tank, if there are any territorial or aggression issues going on, and just sort of connecting with the tank more to get a better understanding of how everything's doing. But if you do the math, my senior year of high school, I think I had 25 tanks. So if I had 25 tanks and spent 10 minutes a day on each tank, that's 250 minutes. That's more than 4 hours of just watching fish. Now, I love fish, I think, more than anyone, at least anyone I've ever met. Maybe there's someone out there who wants to watch their fish for 4 hours a day. But generally, I feel like that's a little too much time, where 20 minutes a day with these 2 tanks is much more manageable. I can connect really well with my fish, and I might like a couple more tanks in this, but 2 really highlights that you can really focus in on your tanks and get a good connection with them that I definitely couldn't when I had 20 or more tanks.